Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new video. This is the second video about my short series about physical training, and if you missed the first video you can find it linked above. Now in this video I want to help you understand how you should, let's say, organize your training during your week depending from many factors actually, which I'm going to start explaining right now. Very good, so there are some important things that you have to keep in mind while you decide how to organize your training week. Some of them are HEMA related and I'm going to discuss them here, and others are outside of HEMA, so such as your job for instance, which I will discuss at the end of the video. Very good, so the HEMA related aspects are of course related to your training at the club. So how much you're actually training, what is the intensity of the training, and so on. So the first point is related to footwork and how much footwork you're actually training at the club. This is one of the most crucial one actually, because depending from this kind of thing that you have to evaluate yourself, of course, you have to add more or lesser training on your legs. So if you do a lot of footwork training at the club, you have to do not, let's say, overcharge too much your legs during your training sessions at the gym, because it may be detrimental. Otherwise, if you do not focus a lot on footwork, which generally speaking is not a great idea at the club, you should try to compensate to an extent by adding some training outside of the club. So when you are training at the gym or in whatever place you're actually having your physical conditioning. The second thing is related to how long is your warm-up, which is between quotation marks for a simple motivation. Some clubs tend to transform their warm-ups into some kind of physical conditioning session, which is not necessarily a great idea, and it also depends from how much training sessions you have, if it may be a good idea or not. To be honest, I don't consider it a good idea generally speaking. Physical training is physical training and should be approached in a specific training session, but this is my opinion. Anyway, you have to consider this kind of thing, because if you have a very tiring warm-ups, let's call them, you have to keep them in consideration, because you are getting even more tired during your standard HEMA training session, and so these may let's say create some problems in terms of recovery for your personal physical conditioning sessions that you are going to have at the gym. The third point is pretty generic actually, and it may comprehend point 1 and 2, but it is a very crucial question that you have to ask yourself. So, are you tired at the end of a HEMA training session, of your average HEMA training session? Because if you don't feel too tired, programming, for example, your gym training session the morning after your HEMA training session, it's fine. But if you feel extremely tired and instead is complex, let's say, to recover in time, it's not a good idea. Point 4 is, are you already practicing some sort of physical conditioning? Now, this may seem to overlap with point 2, but in that point I'm actually pointing toward some kind of practice which is not really good. So some kind of hybrid between a warm-up and physical conditioning. Instead here I'm asking you if your club gives you some kind of dedicated session for physical conditioning, which is another thing entirely, basically. So in the case you have some sort of physical conditioning, proper physical conditioning at the club, you have to program your own physical conditioning away from that moment, of course. And if you have a lot of physical conditioning at the club because you train in a pretty serious way and your club is very serious, you should maybe even avoid training by yourself. Maybe you should just stick with what your club is doing, and that's it. And now the most important point of all, which is how much times are you training HEMA during a single week. This is pretty important because depending from how much days you are having training, and of course what you're actually training, as we have seen before in the other points, this modifies the way in which you should approach your physical conditioning at the gym. Very good, so let's now analyze some cases related to the various points we have seen before. I am focusing on two of them actually, which is how much trainings per week you are having at your club and how much footwork you are training during these training sessions. Of course, I am taking in consideration these 2 points because are the most important ones, but also are easier to organize and create a few cases that I can present you. Adding the other points makes for 1,000 cases. So you simply have to analyze them by yourself, and with the knowledge you have of your own specific condition, you can adjust what I'm going to say right now. So case 1 is 1 or 2 HEMA training sessions per week with lesser than 20 minutes of footwork per session. Now this is basically the description of the average HEMA club around the globe. And in these conditions you have to know that you are basically free of doing whatever you want during your physical training sessions at the gym, because you are not experiencing too much stress actually, and you are free of organizing your training week in whatever way you want. You can train for 2, 3, 4 days per week at the gym, and it's not a big deal basically. It all depends, of course, by your objective. Now, if you do not have any competitive objective or whatever, and you just want to train a little bit more to improve your performance while training at the club and to be a little bit more injury-free, basically, you should consider having a couple of training sessions per week, ideally 3 if you want to invest a little bit more time. And to organize them, you just have to check, for instance, my first video in regards of physical training. You can find a couple of examples of how you can deal with this kind of training sessions. But you have to remember that the most crucial point here is that if you are training in this kind of way, so 1 or 2 HEMA training sessions per week with lesser than 20 minutes of footwork, you do not have to care too much about what you're doing at the gym. You can do whatever you want, basically. Case 2 is 1 or 2 HEMA trainings per week with more than 20 minutes of footwork per session, which may be for 1 session or 2, whatever. The deal here is that you have to place your leg days, or leg day, let's call them, far away from the training session at the club in which you are having your heavy footwork training, let's say. Because if these training sessions are close to each other, you basically influence in a bad way both of them. So if you basically train, let's say, heavy squatting on Monday and you have a lot of footwork on Tuesday, your footwork performance will be terrible. And having that kind of training may be less useful in this kind of way. Instead, if you have 1 day of rest between the 2 sessions, it's okay. So you, generally speaking, can recover in a decent way and have 2 good training sessions which you can take profit from. If you can't, let's say, put these training sessions farther away from each other, so with 1 day of rest in between, it is better, in my opinion, to have a better footwork training session and a slightly worse training session at the gym. So you should place, in the worst case scenario, your leg day after having your footwork session at the club, because you have to prioritize anyway your footwork over your strength and power conditioning, whatever. Case 3, so 3 or 4 HEMA trainings per week with lesser than 20 minutes of footwork per session. Now here we are still relatively free, but we have to be more careful in placing our training sessions, especially if you have some sort of physical conditioning during your training sessions. Because if you have 3 or 4 HEMA trainings, chances that your instructor is giving you also some sort of physical conditioning. And in this case, you have to pay attention in placing, if you want, of course, to have a more training, more physical conditioning, you have to place your physical conditioning far away from the one that has been already gave you by the instructor at the club. If you're not having any kind of physical conditioning at the club, you are basically free of doing almost whatever you want at the gym, especially if you train 3 days per week and not 4. If you train 3 days per week, you just have to pay attention to where to place the day in which you are having more stress on your leg during the week. Ideally, one of the best ways of placing it is at the beginning of the week, not at the end, in my opinion, because in this way you are fresh after the weekend. You have the hardest training day at the gym on Monday, basically, and even if you have your training at the club the same day, you basically sacrifice a little bit of performance on that day, but you are basically lowering the chance of injuring yourself in any way due to training. So you don't have any problem in, generally speaking, approaching your training at the gym, your leg day, and then you approach your HEMA training session. You will be a little bit lesser performing, but that's it. Then the rest of the week will be most probably fine. If you have especially upper body parts trainings or low intensity leg days during the week, which you should place again far away if possible from training days. But now that you have a lot of HEMA training days, it is not possible. So this is just something that you have to consider yourself depending from your situation. Case 4 is 3 or 4 HEMA trainings per week with more than 20 minutes of footwork per session. Now, whatever it is the case, if you're having this kind of footwork trainings every single day or some of the days, here we are in a more complex situation. Generally speaking, the idea here is that you have to lower a lot, generally speaking, the leg training that you are having at the gym, to an extent that you're doing something relatively light for this kind of muscle group. In this kind of situation, you are forced to do this because you are already having a lot of leg training during the week, and it will be hard to recover from it, generally speaking. Remember that the legs take more time to recover if compared to the upper body parts. Instead, because of this same motivation, you can focus on having more trainings for your upper body parts, so back, chest, and especially arms in HEMA actually, because it will be useful for your weapon handling, and also it will not take too much to rest and will not influence a lot your training sessions at the club. Still, because you are having so much training, you have to carefully consider where to place your training sessions anyway, whatever is the case, but especially you have to consider a lot your volume of work that you are doing at the gym, whatever is the muscle group that you are focusing on. Now here everything depends from how much you are into competitions mainly. If you are not training to compete, you can simply have a couple of training days per week. Of course, if you want to have the additional training in the first place, because it is enough to, let's say, improve your physical performance, generally speaking, during your training sessions, and it is also enough to save you from injuries instead of increasing the chance of having more injuries because you are having more training. So a couple of training days per week is enough, either if you are having 3 or 4 HEMA trainings per week, And in my opinion, you should have like a day which is organized as a full body workout with some leg work and some upper body work, and another day which is related to upper body parts work, which, as I mentioned, take lesser time to recover from, and so you can place wherever you want to do it during the week, basically. Instead, the day in which you are also training legs, as I mentioned, you have to place it in the smartest way possible, far away if it is possible from your training days at the club, or at the beginning of the week if it is not possible. If you are into tournaments and generally speaking you want to improve a lot your performance, maybe 3 days per week is the ideal number for you in this kind of case, because it is still a good number of days to recover from in a decent way, or good way, especially if you are young. But you have a lot of time at the gym to basically check all the boxes and train all the aspects of training that you want. 3 days is probably the best if you're having 3 or 4 days of training at the club. Very good. So a few things that you have to remember, whatever is your case. So the first one is related to recovery. So your recovery is also influenced by other factors, such as your job, nutrition, and hours of sleep. So if you are having a job which is already pretty tiring, you have to consider carefully adding other physical activity other than HEMA itself. Most probably you are already doing enough to your body, and recovering from all this stuff is too much. So it is maybe not a good idea to add other physical activity. Maybe. It depends from case to case, of course. Nutrition is kind of a cliche, and because of this, motivation is not taken in consideration enough sometimes. But you have to remember that your recovery is based also on your nutrition, and as you probably already know, the more protein you eat during the day, the better it is in terms of recovery, generally speaking, without entering too much into the detail. But remember that if you are serious with your training, you have to be serious with your nutrition too. And the last point related to recovery is sleep, and of course, as you probably already know, I hope, you should have at the very least 7 hours of sleep per night, ideally 8, or even more if you have a lot of time to invest in this kind of lovely activity. But it's not, of course, easy for most of us. We have to work, we have a lot of things to do, but recover that sleeping is crucial, and sometimes, not every time, do not take it as a rule, but sometimes it is better to miss one training day to recover a little bit more than trying to do everything and sticking in a, let's say, obsessive way to your schedule, but without recovering enough. Because if you not recover enough from your training sessions and you're training a lot, you increase the chance of injury, which means that you are going to train lesser and lesser because of your injury, or training in a very bad way. So keep this in mind, and have your sleep, which is crucial. And the last point which I wanted to mention is you are the only one in charge, in a sense that whatever is the case, if you are an instructor which is following you for the technical part, a personal trainer which is following you for the gym training, you are the person which is experiencing the stuff. So you are the only person which knows what is going on in your body, in your technique, during your training, whatever. So even if someone is giving you advices and telling you what to do, you have to sometimes ask yourself some questions and give them some answers. You have to, of course, trust people which are good at their job, but at the same time, again, you are the only person which is experiencing the training and can influence that training by understanding what is going on in their body. So keep it in consideration, because it is crucial, and sometimes it saves you from having certain injuries, whatever is the context of training. Very good, people. I hope you will find this video useful in some ways. Thanks for watching as always. Remember to check my Patreon, link in the description if you want to support me and the channel. And well, as always, see you next time.